so much for your invitation. And I want to inform you today about a kind of work in progress. There is a desire of us to come back to the origin of Mahatma Gandhi's concepts, just to understand the way how Gandhi created, with new Indian terms, his own philosophy, referring to Satyagraha, firmness and truth, Sarvodaya, advancement of all or welfare of all, uplift of all, Swadeshi, self-reliance, self-rule, Swaraj. So these four key concepts of Gandhi were defined and redefined by him in South Africa. So I'm more interested in his formation years during his time in South Africa. I would like to share some of our efforts. In a separate essay, we have elaborated the origin of Satyagraha in the year 1907, developing the concept of passive resistance from 1906 to a new concept, combining the ideas of Henry David Thoreau, civil disobedience against slavery and war, and the non-violent, non-cooperation principle of Leo Tolstoy, who had been a kind of inspiring social reformer of this age for so many people. There were Tolstoy settlements all around the world. There was also another great English author who was a social critic, fierce critic of the Victorian age and the economy. That was John Ruskin. And John Ruskin also inspired Ruskin cooperatives all over the world. That was before the First World War. So we are here in a very interesting situation. Gandhi first invented a new word in a way. It was in January 1908 when he came to the conclusion that Satyagraha is the right word. And now he tried to exemplify the virtues of a Satyagrahi in the following months. That was May 1908, when he said, a Satyagrahi will adhere to truth to the last. If we want to be Satyagrahis, we must have the courage to range ourselves against the government or our own community, if necessary. And courage consists in being fearless. We must be fearless about everything. We must have no fear of violence to our person or of loss of money. We may even lose the good opinion of others. We may let everything go, but we must not allow truth to forsake us. This and this alone is fearlessness. This is what Gandhi wrote in his Johannesburg letter in Indian Opinion, May 1908. And what followed was a kind of rewriting of the story of Socrates, the story of a soldier of truth. Socrates as the role model of a fearless man. He gave us some idea of man's duty. He practiced his precepts. It can be argued that Ruskin's ideas are an elaboration of Socrates's. Ruskin has described vividly how one who wants to live by Socrates' ideas acquits himself in the different vocations. Holding a cup of poison in his hands, Socrates addressed to his dear pupil a discourse on the immortality of the soul, which the world will ever cherish. His gentle language bears testimony to the fact that there was no trace in his heart of any ill will or anger for the warder who gave him the cup or the judge who sentenced him to take poison. This is quite remarkable. If you see the writings in Indian Opinion in the year 1908, you see a sequel of 6 parts, Story of a Soldier of Truth, summarizing the Apology and Kriton, the main works written by Plato on Socrates' defense against false accusations, and also a demonstration of the immortality of the soul and how to do his duty towards truth. And why is Gandhi referring, why is he just suggesting a context of Socrates and John Ruskin? So, as we know, what followed was like a sequel, not just the story of a soldier of truth on Socrates, but also a paraphrase of Ruskin's main work, Unto This Last, 4 essays on the principles of modern economy. And 9 parts Gandhi wrote. He translated this book into Gujarat, gave it a new title called Sarvodaya, and that was the universal dawn. That was the sunrise, you can say, the uplift of all, the sunrise for everyone, for the weakest. And John Ruskin, as well as others, referred to the principle of equality. And he was actually a Christian socialist. He referred to the parable of the workers in the vineyard, and they all get equal pay, guaranteed income, can live on that. This is the basis of human dignity. So, as we all know, Gandhi was summarizing his lesson of John Ruskin's Unto This Last in his autobiography, The Story of My Experiments with Truth, and he summarized the teaching of Unto This Last as he understood in 3 points. First, that the good of the individual is contained in the good of all. Second, that a lawyer's work has the same value as the barber's, inasmuch as all have the same right to earning their livelihood from their work. And third, that a life of labor, that is the life of the tiller of the soil and the handicraftsman, is the life worth living. The first of these I knew, Gandhi wrote. The second I had dimly realized. The third had never occurred to me. Until this last made it as clear as daylight for me that the second and the third were contained in the first. I arose with the dawn, ready to reduce these principles to practice. And as the legend goes, the legend, which is historic truth according to Gandhi, he got this book recommended by his friend Henry S. L. Pollack, Henry Solomon Leon Pollack, his Jewish secretary. He read this book in the train and in the night, and then he, in the morning, after reading this book, he was convinced it's important to create my own settlement. As we know, Phoenix settlement in the diverse environment, international printing press, and a good basis for Indian opinion in 4 languages, not just English, Hindi, also other languages which are important. Tamil language, just to highlight this language as another. And Indian opinion was the voice of the Indian community. And according to Gandhi, Indian opinion was actually a project. This is quite interesting. I can say the paper is being run on Tolstoy's and Ruskin's lines. This is Gandhi's Word. The paper is being run on Tolstoy's and Ruskin's lines. Its publicly declared mission is to bring the two communities, European, Indian, together and become an educative medium for the Indian community. Educative, that refers also to a nearby project of John Dube, who was inspired by Booker T. Washington, as well as Gandhi was inspired, had been inspired by Booker T. Washington and his Tuskegee Institute. And John Dube was very close by Inanda Farm, very close by, and he was an educator. He founded the Zulu Christian Industrial School, which is now known as the Orlando High School near Phoenix, and Eko Vakamini. It was the first educational institution in South Africa to be founded by people with black skin color. And John and Nkutela Dube, as we know, were then very much impressed by Gandhi's Satyagraha movement, and the precursors of the African National Congress was deeply inspired by Gandhi's emancipation struggle. And Dube himself influenced pupils, students like Albert John Luthuli, and it was the first South African Nobel Peace Laureate. And this was a education project. So what actually is John Ruskin's main message, and I think I will reduce my references now, because I would like to give a voice to John Ruskin. But before I do this, I want to say that there is a parallel influence of the bread labor concept by the Russian peasant writer Timofey Bondarev, who inspired Leo Tolstoy. And I can show you here, this is the essay of Leo Tolstoy, Labor, published in 1890. So Gandhi could have read this during his student days. And Bondarev's idea was, among others, that all intellectual laborers shall work at least for 1 month. Manual labor, gardening, agriculture, etc., crafts, so that they get an understanding, and that this is not this division of labor. This is very important between manual labor and intellectual labor. And Bondarev inspired Tolstoy, and through Tolstoy, Gandhi, because bread labor became even a high sacrifice for Gandhi in the course of after the First World War. So it was the basic philosophy behind the Chaka movement, behind the spinning wheel, also behind the Salt March. It was the basic idea complex. And Gandhi himself, in his paraphrase, did not elaborate on the New Testament references. He wanted to simplify the contents, and he wanted to give an idea of the basic thoughts of Ruskin. But just to bring some interesting aspects into self-reliance nowadays, just remember the fact that Swadeshi was the concept that was not invented by Gandhi, as we know. There have been Swadeshi movements in the 19th century, and Swadeshi, Gandhi wrote in New Year 1909, that was the year of Hind Swaraj, Indian Home Rule. Swadeshi carries a great and profound meaning. It does not mean merely the use of what is produced in one's own country. That meaning is certainly there in Swadeshi, but there is another meaning implied in it, which is far greater and much more important. Swadeshi means reliance on our own strength. We should also know what we mean by reliance on our own strength. Our strength means the strength of our body, our mind, and our soul. From among these, on which should we depend? The answer is brief. The soul is supreme, and therefore soul force is the foundation on which man must build. Passive resistance or satyagraha is a mode of fighting which depends on such force. That, then, is the only real key to success for the Indians. And what actually, and I would like to end my my address to you, what actually did Ruskin say? What was his message? What was the provoking message of John Ruskin? And I was very happy to visit his place at Brantwood, near Coniston Waters in the Lake District, northwest England, right in the time when a great manager there organized an exhibition on Ruskin and Gandhi. That was end of the 90s. It had been a great experience to absorb the landscape of John Ruskin. John Ruskin wrote some writings. One of them is quite interesting, is the Crown of Wild Olive. In this essay, there's one lecture of Ruskin in a military cadet school in St. Andrews, praising the bravery of soldiers, but then in the end recommending them to find an alternative to their means and methods, their weapons. So this inspired Gandhi, certainly, because the idea of nonviolent resistance has always been closely connected with the idea of equality, and also the basis, the vocations as a basis for a fearless life, truthful life. But now let's give the voice to John Ruskin. John Ruskin's essay is consisting of, actually, it's a collection of 4 essays, and this is from the second, The Veins of Wealth. Let's give a voice now ad vocem John Ruskin. An accumulation of real property is of little use to its owner unless, together with it, he has commercial power over labor. Thus, suppose any person to be put in possession of a large estate of fruitful land with rich beds of gold in its gravel, countless herds of cattle in its pastures, houses and gardens and storehouses full of useful stores, but suppose after all that he could get no servants. In order that he may be able to have servants, someone in his neighborhood must be poor and in want of his gold or his corn. Assume that no one is in want of either, and that no servants are to be had. He must therefore bake his own bread, make his own clothes, plow his own ground, and shepherd his own flocks. His gold will be as useful to him as any other yellow pebbles on his estate. His stores must rot, for he cannot consume them. He can eat no more than another man could eat, and wear no more than another man could wear. He must lead a life of severe and common labor to produce even ordinary comforts. He will be ultimately unable to keep either houses in repair or fields in cultivation, and forced to content himself with a poor man's portion of cottage and garden in the midst of a desert of wasteland, trampled by wild cattle and encumbered by ruins of palaces, which he will hardly mock at himself by calling his own. No, this idea to have a self-reliant basis in the desert reminds us at Tolstoy farm, and you can imagine that me as the author of the first biography on Hermann Kallenbach was reminded the fruit trees planted in the desert-like landscape near the train station Lawley in Johannesburg, and the corrugated iron roofs, and the sandal making themselves taught by the Trappist monastery monks from Germany nearby, and all these experiences of South African settlements as also basic experience for future ashram life. Now, back to Ruskin. Capital signifies head, or source, or root material. It is material by which some derivative or secondary good is produced. It is only capital proper, caput vivum, not caput mortuum, when it is thus producing something different from itself. It is a root which does not enter into vital function till it produces something else than a root, namely fruit. That fruit will in time again produce roots. And so all living capital issues in reproduction of capital. But capital, which produces nothing but capital, is only root, producing root. Bulb issuing in bulb, never in tulip. Seed issuing in seed, never in bread. The political economy of Europe has hitherto devoted itself wholly to the multiplication, or less even the aggregation of bulbs. Never saw nor conceived such a thing as a tulip. From his fourth essay, no scene is continually and untiringly loved, but one rich by joyful human labor, smooth in field, fair in garden, full in orchard, trim, sweet and frequent in homestead, ringing with voices of vivid existence. No air is sweet that is silent. It is only sweet when full of low currents of undersound, triplets of birds, and murmur chirp of insects, and deep-toned words of men, and wayward trebles of childhood. As the art of life is learned, it will be found at last that all lovely things are also necessary. The wild flower by the wayside, as well as the tended corn, and the wild birds, creatures, every wondrous word and unknoble work of God. Or this one about luxury. Luxury is indeed possible in the future. Innocent and exquisite. Luxury for all, and by the help of all. But luxury at present can only be enjoyed by the ignorant. The cruelest man living could not sit at his feast unless he sat blindfold. Raise the veil boldly, face the light, and if as yet the light of the eye can only be through tears, the light of the body through sackcloth, go thou forth weeping, bearing precious seed, until the time come and the kingdom, when Christ's gift of bread and bequest of peace shall be unto this last as unto thee. And when, for earth's severed multitudes of the wicked and the weary, there shall be holier reconciliation than that of the narrow home and calm economy, where the wicked cease, not from trouble, but from troubling, and the weary are at rest. And what might be interesting is that in later years, Gandhi continued to read Ruskin, particularly his fourth Clavigera, Letters to the Workmen and Laborers of Great Britain. This is amazing. It's quite clear. It's also very precise. So you can read these quotes again in our exhibition, which I sent you the link in the chat. And this exhibition on Ruskin is the first exhibition on him as a social critic. Let's come to tax. All rich people object to income tax, of course. They like to pay as much as a poor man pays on their tea, sugar, and tobacco, nothing on their incomes. Whereas, in truth justice, the only honest and wholly right tax is one not merely on income, but property, increasing in percentage as the property is greater. And the main virtue of such a tax is that it makes publicly known what every man has and how he gets it. Publicly known what every man has and how he gets it. Maybe the last one from, say, it's difficult to stop, you know, if you start reading John Ruskin. It's another, you know, it's another spiritual inspiration. Somehow, it is certainly a basic book, which, among others, Edward Carpenter's critiques of civilization, for example, certainly influenced in Swaraj. And just think about the very interesting fact that was Socrates' structure of a dialogue, which inspired his Swaraj as a dialogue on the sea, because Socrates was famous for his dialectic method of inquiry, known as the Socratic dialogue, which he largely applied to the examination of key moral concepts, as for example the good, just, or the wisdom of common sense. The Socratic method, also known as elenctic method, is a form of a dialogue, an argumentative dialogue between cooperating individuals based on asking and answering questions to stimulate critical thinking and to draw out the meaning of ideas and underlying assumptions. And this was mainly to dismiss all notions of assassinations, of violent revolts, of civil war, which was on the rise during these years, to throw off the yoke of the British colonialism and imperialism. And actually, it was quite interesting that Gandhi himself had a preference for John Ruskin, and just for the end of this address, just telling you how he started his 9 chapters on Sarvodaya and how he concluded. He started with saying, people in the West generally hold that it is man's duty to promote the happiness, prosperity that is of the greatest number. Happiness is taken to mean material happiness exclusively, that is economic prosperity. If in the pursuit of this happiness moral laws are violated, it does not matter much. Again, as the object is the happiness of the greatest number, people in the West do not believe it to be wrong if it is secured at the cost of the minority. The consequences of this attitude are in evidence in Western countries. The exclusive quest for the physical and material happiness of the majority has no sanction in divine law. In fact, some thoughtful persons in the West have pointed out that it is contrary to divine law to pursue happiness in violation of moral principles. The late John Ruskin was foremost among these. He was an Englishman of great learning. He has written numerous books on art and crafts. He has also written a great deal on ethical questions. One of these books, a small one, Ruskin himself believed to be his best. This is read widely wherever English is spoken. In the book, he has effectively countered these arguments and shown that the well-being of the people at large consists in conforming to the moral law. This is also directed against Bentham, and it is against a very reduced utilitarianist conception. It is in our exhibition, you see also the clear reference to the New Testament. And when he finished his series, his sequel on Sarvodaya, that might be interesting. It is a very interesting fact that he took all these efforts, Gandhi, to publish these texts into a Gujarati. It's amazing. And then they were retranslated again to English. And I could read them during my first visit in India in 1985. That was wonderful. So it is perhaps to conclude that The demand of Swarajya, self-reliance, is the demand of every Indian. It is a just demand, Gandhi writes. This is the last chapter I read. But Swarajya is to be achieved by righteous means. It must be real Swarajya. It cannot be achieved by violent methods or by setting up factories. We must have industry, but of the right kind. India was once looked upon as a golden land because Indians then were people of sterling worth. The land is still the same, but the people have changed, and that is why it has become arid. To transform it into a golden land again, we must transmute ourselves into gold by leading a life of virtue. The philosopher's stone, which can bring this about, consists of 2 syllables, satya. If therefore every Indian makes it a point to follow truth always, India will achieve Swaraj